London's high society called it the wedding of the season. Every titled family within 50 miles of Mayfair attended the union of Lady Juliana Wren, the last daughter of the disgraced Wren family, and His Grace Alexander Hawthorne, the Duke of Pembroke. A man whispered about in every drawing-room for both his fortune and his mystery. The cathedral gleamed with candlelight, and the choir's hymns soared to the vaulted ceiling. Juliana stood beneath the marble arch, her hands trembling inside lace gloves, her heart pounding with both hope and dread. To the world, she was radiant, her pale pink gown embroidered with silver threads, her veil a cloud of silk and dreams. But behind her demure smile lay the heavy weight of uncertainty. The Duke had hardly spoken to her since their engagement was announced. Even now, as she turned to face him at the altar, she saw only calm detachment in his grey eyes. No tenderness, no warmth. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Alexander bent just enough to brush her gloved hand with his lips. The touch was brief, mechanical, almost reluctant. That night, the grand halls of Ravensvale Manor blazed with celebration. The orchestra played waltzes, crystal glasses clinked, and society's finest toasted the newlyweds. Juliana smiled, danced when asked, and played the part of the blushing bride, but her husband was nowhere to be seen. He disappeared shortly after the first toast, and no one seemed surprised. "The Duke," whispered one lady in silk blue, "has never favoured company for long." Another added in a hushed tone, "They say he still mourns the woman he lost." Juliana forced herself to ignore the gossip, clinging to the fragile hope that perhaps he was simply overwhelmed. Yet, as the hours passed and the candles burned low, that hope withered. When the last carriage rolled away, the laughter faded, and the house fell silent. Juliana stood alone in the bridal chamber, still in her gown, still waiting. The clock struck midnight. The fire had gone cold. The moonlight poured through the drapes like silver sorrow. And then she realized he was not coming. Her husband, the man who had just sworn before God to cherish her, had vanished on their wedding night. No note, no explanation, only silence. By dawn the servants had begun whispering. The maids avoided her eyes as they carried away the untouched breakfast tray. The house steward spoke softly of urgent matters that had called His Grace away, but his pitying tone betrayed the lie. Juliana sat before the mirror, her reflection pale and still, the heavy diamond necklace glinting against her throat like a chain. She thought of the letters he had sent before the wedding, polite, formal, distant. Never once had he spoken of affection. Now she understood why. This marriage had been an arrangement, a means of restoring her ruined family's name, and perhaps for him, a distraction from something or someone else. When evening came and still no word arrived, she went to the drawing-room where his mother, the Dowager Duchess, sat in quiet elegance, embroidering by the fire. The older woman's eyes, sharp as cut glass, flicked briefly upward when Juliana entered. "Your Grace," Juliana began softly, her voice quivering despite her effort to sound composed. "Forgive me, but has my husband written? Do you know where he has gone?" The needle paused mid-stitch. "My son," the Dowager said finally, "has always carried ghosts heavier than any man should bear. You will learn, in time, that his absences are not without reason." Juliana's heart tightened. "Then he will return?" she asked. The Duchess met her gaze, her expression unreadable. "That, my dear, depends on whether his conscience allows him to." That night, Juliana lay alone once more in the vast canopied bed. The storm outside clawed at the windows, and in every clap of thunder she heard the echo of her vows. To have and to hold from this day forward. But he had left her before the day had even ended, and yet, in the midst of her heartbreak, something inside her refused to break completely. If Alexander Hawthorne had married her to silence gossip or to bury his past, then she would uncover the truth he tried to hide. For every secret he kept, she would find an answer, even if it destroyed her heart in the process. The next morning broke grey and bitter over Ravensvale Manor, as if the skies themselves mourned with Juliana. The servants moved quietly through the halls, their whispers floating like ghosts through the corridors. "He's gone to London," one footman said. "No, to the North Estate," another replied. Each rumour tangled into the next until even the walls seemed to hum with unanswered questions. Juliana, still pale from a sleepless night, descended to breakfast alone. The long table stretched before her, filled with dishes she could not touch. Golden scones, quail eggs, steaming tea, all prepared for a marriage that already felt hollow. She sat at the head of the table, her fingers trembling around the china cup, and wondered if this was what it meant to be a duchess, to wear a crown of ice, to smile through humiliation, to pretend not to feel. By afternoon, she could no longer bear the quiet. Wrapping herself in a cloak, Juliana walked through the gardens that stretched behind the manor, wild, overgrown, and half forgotten. She needed air, distance, something to clear the ache that pulsed inside her chest. The wind tugged at her veil, scattering petals from the last of the summer roses. And there, among the tangled hedges, she saw him. Not Alexander, but a tall, broad-shouldered man in the livery of Pembroke's stables. He was inspecting one of the stone benches, his brow furrowed, his gloved hand brushing over a faint carving in the marble. When Juliana drew closer, he startled and bowed quickly. "Your Grace," he said, "forgive me. I did not see you." Juliana's gaze drifted to the stone. The carving was faint but visible, a pair of initials entwined, A.H. and C.M. Her heart gave a sharp, painful twist. "Those letters," she murmured, tracing them lightly with her fingertips. "They're my husband's, are they not?" The man hesitated. "Yes, Your Grace. His Grace carved them himself years ago. It was before—" He stopped, catching himself, his expression tightening. "Before what?" Juliana pressed, her voice steady but her pulse racing. He lowered his gaze. "Before the accident, my lady." The word struck like a bell through the fog of confusion. "Accident," she repeated, but the servant only bowed again and excused himself, vanishing down the path before she could demand more. That night, Juliana could not sleep. The phrase echoed endlessly in her mind. Before the accident. What accident? Who was C.M.? She went to the library, seeking answers in the quiet hours past midnight. The shelves smelled of dust and age, and the portraits above the fireplace seemed to watch her. She found an old photograph tucked between the pages of a weathered poetry volume, a woman in a soft muslin gown, her smile gentle and knowing. On the back, in a hand, she recognized from her husband's letters, were the words, "For Clara, who taught me to see beauty even in grief." Juliana's breath caught. Clara. The initials fit. C.M. Clara Mayfield. The name echoed faintly in her memory. She had heard it once before, in a hushed conversation between two debutantes months ago. She was his fiancée, they had whispered. Died under strange circumstances. The Duke hasn't been the same since. The room seemed to spin. The realization that she was living in the shadow of a dead woman, that her husband's heart still belonged to another, struck with cruel clarity. She sank into the chair by the fire, the photograph trembling in her hands. No wonder he could not love her. No wonder he had left. She was a replacement, a duty, a living echo of what he had lost. But as the flames flickered, another thought took root, quieter, sharper. If he mourned her still, why marry again at all? What purpose did their union serve if his soul was buried with Clara Mayfield? As if in answer, the library door creaked. A gust of cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing one of the candles. Juliana froze. Then came the faint sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, approaching from the hall. She turned sharply toward the door, her heart pounding, but it was only her maid, pale and breathless. "Your Grace," the girl whispered, "a rider has arrived from the West Road. It's his Grace, the Duke. He's returned." Juliana's pulse leapt, returned after 2 days of silence. She rose, gathering her composure, though her hands trembled. "Where is he?" she asked. "In the study, my lady. He says he must speak with you. Alone." As Juliana walked through the darkened corridors toward the study, she felt a strange mix of anger and dread. The house was silent, save for the steady beat of rain against the windows. When she reached the heavy oak door, she paused, her hand hovering over the brass handle. She was no longer the trembling bride of 2 nights ago. Whatever truth awaited her inside that room, she would face it. And when she opened the door and saw the Duke standing by the fire, his clothes soaked from the storm, his eyes hollow and red-rimmed, she knew, even before he spoke, that the confession he carried would change everything. The fire burned low in the grate, casting a soft amber glow over the study's panelled walls. Alexander Pembroke stood before it, the heat painting weary shadows across his sharp, haunted features. His dark coat was still damp from the storm, and droplets clung to the edges of his hair. When Juliana entered, he turned, slowly, as if every movement cost him a piece of strength. "You shouldn't have waited up," he murmured. His voice, usually deep and controlled, trembled faintly. "I did not think you would wish to see me." Juliana's heart twisted at the sight of him, yet anger steadied her voice. "You left me, Alexander, on our wedding night. You didn't even say a word." He closed his eyes briefly, as if her words were a lash. "I know," he said quietly. "And for that you have every right to despise me, but I could not. I dared not stay." Juliana took a step closer, her gown whispering across the rug. "Dared not? What could possibly justify abandoning your bride?" He looked up then, his eyes dark with something raw. Guilt, grief, maybe both. "Because this house," he said slowly, "is filled with ghosts, Juliana, and one of them wears a face I cannot forget." He crossed to the desk, his movements tense and deliberate, and drew open a drawer. From within, he pulled a folded letter, its edges yellowed, its ink faded with time. He held it out to her, but his hand shook. "You found the photograph, didn't you?" he asked softly. Juliana hesitated, her throat tight. "I did. Clara Mayfield. She was my fiancée," he finished for her, his voice low and broken. 3 years ago we were to be married here in this very house. The night before the wedding there was a storm, was it worse than this one? She insisted on riding to the cliffs to clear her head. She never came back. His jaw clenched, and his gaze drifted to the window, where rain streaked down like tears. They found a horse at the edge. The cliffs had given way. Silence filled the room, heavy, suffocating. Juliana's chest ached as she watched him stare into the fire, his expression hollow. "I blame myself," he continued, barely above a whisper. "I was the one who told her to go. We had argued that night. She accused me of marrying her for duty, for legacy. And perhaps she was right. She said she wanted truth, and I gave her pride instead. He laughed bitterly, the sound jagged. When they brought back her locket, I swore I'd never love again, never risk binding another soul to my cursed name. Juliana felt the tremor in his words echo in her bones. The letter in his hand trembled before he set it on the desk. That was her final note, he said, written hours before she died. I couldn't read it for months, and when I finally did... He hesitated, then met her eyes. It said she forgave me, that she wished for me to find peace, even love, someday. But how could I? When every time I closed my eyes, I saw her falling and heard her screams swallowed by the wind. Juliana's hand pressed to her heart. Alexander, she whispered. He shook his head sharply. Do you understand now why I left that night? Standing beside you at the altar, I saw her. In you? Not in appearance, but in spirit. The same grace, the same kindness, and I realized that if I touched you, if I let you into my heart, I might damn you to the same fate. Tears blurred Juliana's vision, but she didn't move. You think you can protect me by destroying me? She asked softly. You took an oath before God, Alexander, not to hide, not to grieve forever, but to live again. He turned toward her fully now, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. You speak as if I have a choice. You do, she said firmly. You can keep running from the past, or you can let it break you open and heal what's left. Her words seemed to strike something deep within him. For the first time, his composure cracked. He sank into the chair beside the fire, his head in his hands. You deserve better than a broken man, he murmured. And yet, Juliana replied gently, crossing to him, here I am. She knelt before him, lifting his chin so their eyes met. You can't undo what happened, Alexander, but you can choose not to let the dead steal the living. For a long moment he only stared at her, as though seeing her for the first time. The silence between them was fragile, trembling, with something that felt dangerously close to hope. Then slowly, he reached for her hand. You would forgive me, he whispered, even after what I've done? Juliana's tears slipped silently down her cheeks. It's not forgiveness you need, she said softly. It's courage. And I will not let you face that alone. Outside, the storm began to fade and the first pale light of dawn crept through the windows. But in that quiet study, two broken hearts found the courage to face the ghosts together. Morning dawned like a soft confession over Ravensvale Manor, washing away the storm's fury with tender gold. The roses outside the east wing bowed heavy with dew, their scent drifting through the open window, like forgiveness itself. Juliana stood there in her pale nightgown, the same she'd worn on the night of her abandonment, though now it seemed like a garment from another life. Behind her, the faint crackle of the dying fire filled the silence, the same room where truths had been bared and ghosts finally named. Her reflection in the glass looked fragile, yet unbroken. She no longer saw a forsaken bride. She saw a woman who had looked pain in the eye and chosen to stay. The door creaked open behind her. She didn't turn at first. She didn't need to. She felt his presence, the quiet weight of him, the familiar gravity that had once drawn her heart in defiance of logic. Alexander Pembroke, Duke of Ravensvale, stood in the doorway. His expression softened by exhaustion and something she had never truly seen before, vulnerability. His cravat hung loose, his hair unkempt, his proud shoulders slumped. For once, the Duke looked human, not a figure of marble and regret, but a man trying at last to live again. Juliana, he said quietly. The word trembled like it had forgotten how to exist on his tongue. I thought you might have gone. She turned slowly to face him, her eyes calm, unreadable. I nearly did, she admitted. Last night, after you told me everything, I thought leaving would be easier. But then I realized something. You've already lost enough to the past. I won't let it steal your future too. His jaw tightened, emotion flickering behind his eyes. You don't know what you're saying. You think a few tears and confessions can undo years of sin? I failed Clara, and I failed you. No, Juliana interrupted softly, stepping toward him. You failed to forgive yourself. That is the cruelest punishment of all. For a long moment, neither spoke. The early light touched their faces, drawing warmth where there had been cold. Alexander's gaze dropped to her hands, delicate, trembling, yet reaching for him all the same. When I left on our wedding night, he said, his voice rough, I rode until dawn. I thought if I stayed away long enough, you might hate me. That hatred would be safer than love, but I couldn't escape you. Every mile I rode, I saw you, not as a ghost of her, but as yourself. And I knew then that running was cowardice. Juliana's throat tightened. And now, she whispered, now I'm done running. He took her hand then, tentative at first, as if touching something sacred. His thumb brushed against her knuckles, tracing invisible apologies. You deserve a husband who is whole, he said. But if you'll have me, broken as I am, I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn the chance to be worthy of you. Juliana smiled faintly, tears glimmering like the morning dew. You don't need to be perfect, Alexander. You just need to be present. The words settled between them like a vow, quieter but far truer than the one spoken before the altar days ago. For the first time since their wedding, Alexander pulled her into his arms. The embrace was not desperate, nor filled with passion born of guilt, but something steadier, the raw honesty of two souls daring to begin again. The rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear was uneven, human, alive. She realized then that love was not the absence of pain, it was the courage to keep feeling despite it. Outside, the manor began to stir. Servants opening shutters, horses whinnying in the stables, the world resuming its rhythm. But inside that room, time seemed to stand still. Alexander lifted her chin gently, his forehead resting against hers. Will you stay? He asked, his voice barely a breath. She smiled through her tears. I was never leaving, she whispered. He kissed her then, not with urgency, but reverence. It was a promise sealed in quiet devotion rather than fire. When they parted, the sun had risen fully, flooding the room with light. The ghosts that had once haunted the Duke of Rovensvale faded into memory, replaced by the living warmth of a woman who refused to give up on him. And as the morning bells rang faintly in the distance, Juliana knew that though their love had been born from sorrow, it would endure, not in spite of their brokenness, but because of it.